She had just buried her father after a tragic workplace accident. All she wanted now was to claim the life insurance that was rightfully hers to help cover the funeral, the debts, the pain. But when she walked into the company office to file the claim, the man at the desk looked at her and said, "We have no record of your father ever working here." What started as a daughter seeking justice would soon unravel into a web of corporate betrayal, a secret identity, and a cover-up that ran deeper than she ever imagined. You're watching Storytelling and Beyond, where real emotions meet gripping twists. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a story that moves you. It was a gray Monday morning when Anya Miller walked into the administrative office of Greystone Infrastructure Company, her hands shaking as she clutched a folder filled with documents, payslips, her father's company ID, and the official death certificate. Her father, George Miller, had died just 6 days earlier when the crane he was inspecting collapsed at a construction site on the north side of the city. He had worked for Greystone for over 2 decades. Everyone on the site knew his name. The funeral had been filled with hard-hatted workers in dusty boots, eyes red with sorrow and disbelief. But none of their grief could pay the bills. The insurance policy, standard for employees like George, was supposed to be a safety net. A $250,000 payout that George had always said would keep things afloat if anything happened. Anya waited patiently until a sharp-featured man in his 50s stepped out of the back room. He wore a name tag, Lyle Hutchins, Regional HR Manager. "Ms. Miller," he said with a practiced smile. She nodded and followed him into a sterile conference room. "I'm here to file a death claim," she began. "My father, George Miller, employee ID GM 241. He passed away on site last week. I have all the documents ready." Lyle took the folder and tapped a few keys on his laptop. Seconds ticked by. Then he frowned. His fingers froze. "I'm sorry, but there must be some confusion." Anya looked up. "We don't have a George Miller listed in our current employee system. Not in the last 3 years." Her heart skipped. "That's impossible. He left for work every day. I have his badge. His pay stubs. His uniforms. He just received his 5-year safety pin last Christmas." Lyle looked genuinely puzzled now. "He may have worked for a subcontractor?" "No. He was direct staff. He ran crews. He had company email. You sent me a condolence letter with your signature on it 2 days ago." Lyle stood up and left the room, promising to double-check records. When he returned, his face was carefully blank. "I spoke to our compliance team. There was a discrepancy in his contract. It's possible he was being paid through another entity, which means he wasn't officially a Greystone employee." Anya's hands began to tremble. "You're saying he did work here, but not officially?" "I'm saying, there's no claimable policy. According to our files, he hasn't existed in our system since 2020. But he died in your safety gear. On your site. Under your crane. I'm very sorry." Anya stood up, her breath coming in short, clipped bursts. "You erased him. I suggest you consult with legal if you feel." "Don't worry," she said through clenched teeth. "I will." As she stepped outside into the cold air, something inside her shifted. This wasn't just about insurance anymore. It was about her father's name. His years of service. And the corporate hands that had wiped his memory clean just to save a few $1,000s. They had no idea who they were up against. Anya didn't sleep much that night. Her father's words echoed in her memory, "Greystone takes care of its own." But now it felt like those words were written in sand, and someone had just swept the tide across them. The next morning, with no appointment and no intention of being polite, she returned to the Greystone main office. She wore her father's old work jacket, the one with the faded embroidered logo and years of dried concrete dust still clinging to the sleeves. The receptionist recognized her instantly and hesitated. "Mr. Hutchins is in a meeting." Anya didn't flinch. "Then he'll have to take a break." Moments later, she was face to face again with Lyle Hutchins, only this time, she had come armed. She slapped down a manila folder thick with documents. Emails from George Miller's company account. Direct deposits from your payroll system. A company newsletter with his name featured under Employee of the Month from last year. He existed. He worked for you. So tell me again how you can't find him? Lyle looked increasingly uncomfortable. He flipped through the papers but offered nothing more than vague shrugs. Our system, it doesn't match these records. It's possible the paperwork was mishandled when we upgraded platforms. Anya leaned across the desk. Or someone deleted his file on purpose. There was a knock at the door. A younger employee poked his head in, eyes darting between them. Lyle, sorry, IT says they found something weird in the old backup logs. Lyle stood. Excuse me. Anya followed him out anyway, trailing into the IT wing of the building. The tech guy, a kid barely older than a college intern, pulled up an archived list of deactivated employee IDs. So this user account, GM241, it wasn't deleted. It was manually renamed and then marked inactive in 2020. Look at the change log. He turned the screen toward Anya. There it was, the old file for George Miller. Then, on March 3, 2020, it was renamed to Gerald Miles. Anya's heart dropped. Gerald Miles? That's not my father's name, she whispered. Lyle was silent now, standing like a man trying not to slip on ice. Why would someone change his name in the system, she asked. The tech guy shrugged. Could be clerical. Could be fraud. I just know the person who did it logged in from Hutchins' clearance level. Anya turned to Lyle. You erased my father's identity. His mouth opened, but no words came out. She turned on her heel and marched back to reception. I want someone higher. Someone in corporate legal. Half an hour later, she sat across from Derek Stone, Greystone's head of legal affairs. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and spoke with quiet confidence. We did a preliminary investigation, Ms. Miller, he said, reviewing the papers she handed over. It seems your father was indeed employed under two identities. One official, one off-contract. Not uncommon for field workers during the post-union restructuring phase. Anya's eyes narrowed. He never said anything about that. He may have signed a confidentiality agreement. Or he may have been coerced by his supervisor to go along with it, Derek replied coolly. Either way, the off-contract status disqualifies him from employee benefits, including life insurance. You buried the policy, Anya said. On purpose. Derek leaned back. Ms. Miller, I suggest you speak with legal counsel. If you attempt to pursue this publicly, you may be exposing your father to legal risks he never wanted. The room fell silent. Then Anya whispered, or maybe I'll be exposing yours. She stood, gathered her files, and left without looking back. They thought they could intimidate her. But now, she had something they feared more than her grief. Proof. Anya's head throbbed as she drove through the outskirts of the city, the folder of documents sitting on the passenger seat like a co-pilot whispering rage. Every word Derek Stone said still echoed in her ears, calm, polished, deliberate. As if her father had been a footnote in a policy manual instead of a man who built their foundations with his bare hands. She needed someone who could give her answers that weren't dipped in legal jargon or lies. That someone turned out to be Luis Ramirez, a crane operator who had worked alongside her father for nearly a decade. She found him through an old photo on her dad's phone, the two of them grinning at a job site with lunchboxes on their laps. She tracked him to a mechanic shop on the east side where he now did part-time work after a back injury forced him off the rigs. Luis was hesitant at first. I don't want trouble, Mija, he said, wiping grease from his hands. I already gave that company too much of my back. Anya looked him straight in the eye. My father died under a rig that collapsed. They erased him from their records and said he was never there. I'm not walking away. Neither would he. Luis exhaled and motioned her into a small break room in the back, pulling the door closed behind him. He lowered his voice. Your dad found out they were faking inspection reports. Safety audits were being signed off without ever happening. He saw an email on his supervisor's tablet that showed a crane he flagged for maintenance was marked as cleared. He got loud about it. Anya's heart pounded. And then what? They shut him up. Transferred him. Told him his contract was being restructured under a different ID, said it was temporary, said it'd fix things quietly. Anya's voice trembled. Did he agree? Luis nodded reluctantly. He didn't want to lose his pension. You were in school. He didn't want to cause waves. Anya sat down, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd suspected. Luis added quietly, but he didn't let it go. Said he was collecting evidence. Told me he was going to expose them once he had everything. That was a week before the accident. Anya looked up sharply. You think it wasn't an accident? I think a lot of things. But you can't prove sabotage. You can prove negligence, though. Fraud. Records being changed. Luis stepped away and rummaged through his old work locker. He returned with a small black flash drive. This was his. He asked me to hold on to it. Said if anything happened to him, make sure someone who cared got it. Anya took it with shaking hands. What's on it? Luis shrugged. I never looked. Didn't want to know. Later that night, in her small apartment, Anya inserted the flash drive into her laptop. It opened instantly. Folders labeled Site 17, Audit Records, Photos, False Signatures. One folder labeled simply, Stone. Inside were screenshots of internal memos. One was from Derek Stone himself, marked confidential, instructing regional managers to clean up employment inconsistencies related to non-union staff during an audit period. George Miller's name and alias were highlighted. She leaned back in her chair, her hands over her mouth. Her father hadn't just died on the job. He'd been silenced before he could speak. And now, she was the one with the microphone. 3 months later, Anya stood inside a packed courtroom, heart pounding behind the clean blazer she had borrowed from her neighbor. The media had latched onto the case once she'd leaked the documents from her father's hidden flash drive. Headlines read: Construction giant accused of erasing worker's identity to avoid payout. Whistleblower's daughter uncovers systemic fraud at Greystone Infrastructure. Greystone's legal team tried to silence her with threats and settlement offers. But Anya refused. She wanted a public trial. She wanted the truth to be heard, word by word, just like her father had tried to do before he was silenced. Now she sat only feet away from the man who had looked her in the eye and told her her father never existed, Derek Stone. Once a powerful legal executive, he now sat behind a long desk with his lawyer, a sheen of sweat on his brow as a federal investigator presented emails, ID logs, and the whistleblower memo from the flash drive. According to this file, the prosecutor said, pointing to the projection screen, Mr. Stone directly instructed HR departments to erase or rename digital employee records that conflicted with the company's union-exempt staffing schemes. The jury murmured. And you'll notice, he continued, the name George Miller was not only erased, he was reassigned an alias, Gerald Miles, and removed from the official payroll to avoid liability in the event of workplace injury or death. Anya stared straight ahead. Calm. Silent. But her fingers dug into the court bench. Then came Luis. Nervous at first, but clear. He confirmed the fraud. The cover-ups. The threats. The silence forced on workers. How George had tried to speak up. How he had died 1 week later. Greystone's lawyers did what they could, blamed rogue employees, claimed miscommunication, called it a tragic administrative error. But the truth now lived in the open. When the judge read the verdict, a civil judgment against Greystone Infrastructure for gross negligence, workplace fraud, wrongful erasure of employee records, and obstruction of benefits, the room erupted in gasps and scribbling pens. Anya was awarded the full insurance payout, damages, and an official letter of apology read into public record. But the victory wasn't about the money. Later that week, Anya stood at the job site where her father had died. They were rebuilding now, with new safety officers, new leadership, and, finally, real oversight. She held a framed photo of her father and mounted it onto a small bronze plaque just outside the gate. In memory of George Miller. He didn't vanish. They tried to erase him. But he became impossible to forget. In the months that followed, Anya used the settlement to create a foundation called the Second Name Project, an organization that provided legal help for blue-collar families whose loved ones had died under suspicious workplace conditions. She traveled to union meetings, public forums, and community centers, sharing her story and pushing for a bill that would make it illegal to alter digital employee records without external audit. One reporter asked her during an interview, "Did you ever think you'd go this far?" She looked down at the bracelet her father gave her before college, a tiny charm with the words, "For the fighter in you." Then she smiled, looked back at the camera, and said, "I didn't come this far for revenge. I came this far for the truth." You've been watching Storytelling and Beyond, where stories are more than words. Their voices rising against silence. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon for more unforgettable, heart-moving stories every week.